Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Thursday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, we've got winter weather advisories out for tonight into about noon Friday for the lower Yukon Valley there on up in toward Galena and the Kobuk Valley, Ambler, and that area, as well as Selawik, Kotzebue, the northwest coast, Kivalina, right on up to Cape Lisburne, and also for the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Also, coastal flood advisories are out, or high surf advisories out for the Shishmaref area and the northwest coast, and winter weather advisories are also out with coastal flood advisories for the central and western Arctic coast. And that's out until 3 p.m. on Friday there for, again, possible minor beach erosion and heavy surf with the winds and snow and possible mixed precipitation. And weather spotter training Thursday, today, November 17th at 6:30 p.m., just about 3 hours from right now. And join the National Weather Service Anchorage Forecast Office and the Anchorage Office of Emergency Management for a virtual webinar. This training will provide information focused on winter weather, safety, and preparedness, and how to submit a weather report. And again, that's at 6:30 this evening. And from there, looking at satellite imagery, western part of the state has clouds with some moisture out toward the coast today, while the east side, looking at a lot of clear skies right on down into the Kenai Peninsula, Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, and down across the Panhandle. Lots of clear skies, a lot of sunshine this afternoon, with temperatures not too bad over the southeast coast in the 30s and 40s. And also the western Arctic coast with that more mild southerly flow, seeing temperatures rise into the lower to mid-30s this afternoon, and a little cooler on the eastern Arctic coast in some areas there. And areas of rain fell heaviest along the north side of Bristol Bay there, with Dillingham picking up about 1/3 of an inch of precipitation, as well as Togiak and Cape Newenham. And then out to the west, you can see kind of a new frontal boundary developing there from western St. Lawrence Island down to just west of the Pribilofs. On the chart today, there's the original front kind of just washing out there along the west coast, bringing some rain, as I mentioned, in heaviest there over the Bristol Bay area, and then lighter amounts up to the north there, maybe 10 to 15 hundredths of an inch of rain falling in Nome, White Mountain, and then even lighter amounts than that north of the Seward Peninsula, except could pick up maybe an inch or two of snow on the southern slopes of the Western Brooks Range. Otherwise, winds much lighter, still pretty breezy up that way, but down from what they were yesterday and overnight last night. And high pressure holding over western Canada, slowly weakening though. Not too much wind into the Panhandle. Lynn Canal, Skagway had gusts to about 40 miles an hour, 45 miles an hour earlier today, and pretty light winds elsewhere with a fair amount of clearing over the eastern interior, and then some light rain kind of shifting westward there over the Alaska Peninsula. And the next system pushes some rain up to the Aleutians later tonight. A little bit of an increase in the winds there. The original front just washes out over the western interior, leaving some moisture behind. Areas of scattered showers in the form of rain, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta down into Bristol Bay. Same thing for Kodiak Island, just a chance of some moisture there. And mixed precipitation on up to the Seward Peninsula. Periods of light snow or snow showers at times, mainly along the northwest coast, Kotzebue, Selawik, up to Kivalina, Point Hope, but dry for the north slope and Arctic coast. And not much change over the eastern interior tonight. Low clouds and fog developing over the Yukon Flats, maybe in the valleys of the Copper River Basin. Stays clear over the Panhandle. And then for tomorrow, that front that formed just kind of washes out and gets stretched apart in that easterly flow across the Bering Sea, pulling that area westward. Still could see some areas of showers anywhere over the southern Bering Sea. Periods of rain for the central and western Aleutians, and gale force northeast winds for the far western Aleutians, maybe a gust to 50 miles an hour. But light winds for the Alaska Peninsula. A little breezy, not too bad, Kodiak Island, but look for periods of light rain and fog. And some of that moisture could push into southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, maybe Kachemak Bay, and even up into southwest Prince William Sound. Otherwise, the eastern interior stays dry with a fair amount of clearing. Look for a few more clouds over the Panhandle with an increasing chance of some moisture down south toward Dixon Entrance late in the day, and then some snow showers up over the northwest part of the state. Periods of light snow there for the western Arctic coast and fog with light winds. And then for Saturday, we've got, again, variably cloudy skies becoming mostly cloudy over the southern panhandle. And still, as that front approaches, kind of not all that strong, but that'll bring a chance of rain in toward Heidelberg, maybe Metlakatla, Ketchikan, and that's about it. Stays dry with increasing clearing as you head north. And the southern and eastern interior looking pretty good with, again, snow showers possible over the long and northwest of the Yukon River to the western Arctic coast. And a weak front brings areas of rain or showers, a chance of anywhere over the southern Bering Sea and the western Alaska Peninsula. Gale force winds, though, for the areas from Amchitka Island to Shimei and Attu out of the north. And for lows tonight, 20s to mid-30s for the Panhandle, and about 0 for the Copper River Basin. Otherwise, mid to upper 30s, Bristol Bay, lower 40s, Kodiak Island. Highs tomorrow, upper 20s to lower 30s, south central Alaska, near 40 for Homer. 40 to 45 there in Bristol Bay, near 4 for Gulkana, 20 to 30 for the Kuskokwim Valley, and upper 30s to mid-40s for the Panhandle, followed by lows again, much like tomorrow morning, 10 to 15 for the Kuskokwim Valley, lower 30s for the Bristol Bay area, 20s to lower 30s for south central Alaska, lower 40s Kodiak Island, followed by highs in the 40s for the Panhandle, and lower to mid-30s Kenai Peninsula. And up to the north, still below 0 for the Yukon Flats tonight, as well as Northway and Tok, Chicken, Eagle, a little above 0, near 30 out to the west, and upper 20s, lower 30s for the Arctic coast. Highs tomorrow, mid-30s for the Arctic coast and the Seward Peninsula, mid to upper teens for the central interior to about Fairbanks, and then lows a little below 0 for the east side and 20s elsewhere. And for the highs, single numbers and teens in the east, to 20s in the west, and out to the southwest coast, upper 30s for the lows tonight, mid-30s for the Pribilofs, upper 30s, lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians, upper 20s for St. Lawrence Island, highs in the 40s, most areas, upper 30s along the southwest coast, and then the lows on Saturday morning, upper 20s, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast, upper 30s to lower 40s for the Aleutians.
Hello, Southeast Alaska. Meteorologist Grant Smith with the National Weather Service here in Juneau, Alaska, with a weather briefing here on November 17th, 2022. Now, what we're looking at is a pattern change as we head into the weekend here. So the last few days, we've been seeing this flow that's moving from Canada into the Gulf. And now we're looking at that reversing, and that's going to allow for some different weather here in the Panhandle. So for starters, a front will be moving in from the west. It's going to be bringing in mostly rain. Now, when it first moves in, we could be seeing a little bit of that snow mixing in, but overall, we're looking at mostly rain for the Panhandle as this front moves through. Now, normally we would actually expect temperatures to warm when this happens, but we're actually expecting very little change in the temperature. So still seeing highs in the 30s and 40s and lows generally in the 30s. So your 5-day outlook, very little impacts is what we're expecting from the weather. So on Friday, still seeing some gusty winds and near the interior gaps, and some patchy fog is possible, especially in the south. And then going into the weekend, that front moves through, so precipitation returns Friday night and persists into early next week. And I know a lot of people are probably looking forward to the Thanksgiving holiday, so here's a quick early look at the Thanksgiving forecast here. Monday through Wednesday, rain likely to start the week. Differences in the exact timing of the arrival of the rain is certainly there in the computer models, but if we simplify it, rain is likely to start the week. Also windy along the coast. Then Thursday and Friday, the rainy weather continues. At this time, we're not seeing any big changes to the weather pattern, so we're going to hold on to the rainy weather Thursday and Friday. And with temperatures slowly cooling down in the atmosphere, we could see a little bit of that snow beginning to mix in, especially in the higher elevations and in the northern Lynn Canal area. And then for the weekend, overall, the low pressure in the Gulf looks to kind of weaken, so that could actually bring in some slight changes in the pattern, but if we still simplify it, no real big hints of a change, so we're still looking at that chance for rain. But as colder air begins to build just to our north in the Yukon, that could actually increase the chances for snow, especially in the northern panhandle. And this forecast lines up actually pretty well with what the CPC, the Climate Prediction Center, is saying, where that 6 to 10 day outlook is looking at a warmer and above normal precip, and then in the 8 to 14 days, so next weekend and on, actually looking at a pattern switch beyond that. So we're actually looking at going into a cooler than normal weather and a drier than normal weather pattern. So stay tuned as we bring you the latest over the coming days, but going forward, looking at a change in the weather pattern as rain returns this weekend. For the National Weather Service here in Juneau, Alaska, I'm meteorologist Grant Smith.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather. VFR over much of the central and eastern interior with some IFR over the Yukon Flats, but VFR southeast coast, North Gulf Coast, and IFR into the western interior from the Brooks Range southward to Kuskokwim Bay, Cape Newenham, and St. Lawrence Island. Some IFR on the central Arctic coast, IFR central Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, Kodiak Island, southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula, marginal VFR. And for the Friday afternoon time period, IFR holds over the Yukon Flats with VFR elsewhere over the eastern interior. Conditions lowering and moving eastward slowly with some IFR up to the mid-Yukon River Valley and also from the southern Seward Peninsula, Norton Bay, westward to Tin City, down across St. Lawrence Island. Kotzebue Sound up into the southern slopes of the western Brooks Range, marginal VFR for much of the north coast, Arctic coast, and north slope. IFR for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, and Adak and Atka look IFR. Marginal VFR now covering the Gulf of Alaska and along the coast of the Panhandle, pushing inland a little bit there for Prince of Wales Island, possibly getting into Metlakatla and Annette, otherwise staying VFR. And for the Saturday morning period, marginal VFR, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, into Whittier, possibly Portage, Resurrection Bay marginal, Kamishak Bay marginal VFR, Ketchimak Bay, Cook Inlet, and northward there to the Alaska Range and the upper Tanana Valley staying VFR, as well as the Yukon Flats still holding on to that low cloud and fog condition. Marginal VFR, western, northern interior, and all of the North Slope and Arctic coast, as well as areas of IFR now out over the Bering Sea and the central and eastern Aleutians. IFR for Kodiak, Fogneck Island, in across the Gulf of Alaska, and in the afternoon that pushes up to the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and eastern Kenai Peninsula. VFR holds from Dillingham, King Salmon, up across all of the Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, northward there to the Brooks Range into the northern Koyukuk Valley, part of the Kobuk Valley, otherwise marginal VFR for the west side, north of the Brooks Range, marginal VFR for the Panhandle, with some IFR down to the southeast toward Misty Fjords, and IFR for the central Aleutians all the way up to St. Lawrence Island. Passes Anatuvik starting out VFR becoming marginal in the afternoon. Adigan VFR becoming marginal. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR. For Rainy, VFR. And windy looking VFR. Isabel, VFR. And more VFR from Antasta, at least for another day. Tanita looking good, VFR flying on either approach. Portage, VFR. Chilkoot and White, looking good, VFR. Freezing levels, upper level ridge slowly retreating off into Canada, taking the warmer air aloft with it 10,000 feet now. They're just north of Skagway in the Yukon, 8,000 feet, covering the eastern interior. Down to 2,000 feet over the west coast areas, 2,000 to 4,000 feet, southeastern Bering Sea, 8,000 feet over Kodiak Island. Icing, pretty best chance would be from the eastern Arctic coast southwestward, north central interior with a narrow band there across Norton Sound, and areas of icing possible over the central western Aleutians and to areas just north of the Pribilofs, as well as the Fox Islands to the Alaska Peninsula. Jet stream, southwest flow 70 to 90 knots. St. Lawrence Island to the western and central Arctic coast. And at 9,000 feet, Looking at west-southwest winds up to 45 knots there for the North Slope and the northwest coast. High pressure making for light variable winds over southern interior Alaska, as well as the central Bering Sea. Otherwise, down toward the Aleutians, we got southeasterlies turning easterly at about 40 knots. And southerly flow coming up, but diminishing as it reaches the north coast of the Panhandle and across the Gulf of Alaska to the North Gulf Coast, turning easterly there across the Barren Islands. And at 3,000 feet, a little bit stronger winds at this level for the North Gulf Coast up to 40 knots from the southeast. Light for the Panhandle and easterlies 30 to 35 knots through the Barren Islands, in across Kamishak Bay into the southern Kuskokwim Valley, and westerlies along the Arctic coast up to 35 knots, 60 knot northeasterlies there for the western Aleutians. Considerable moderate chop from Atka Island westward to Shimmy.
Hello, Star Spires, Trace here. The stars aren't all the same. Some are colorful, some are big, some are old, and if you know where to look, you can see stars being born. Hit the darkness around 9 p.m. and look east. You should see that bright red dot, that's Mars, and up to the right of it is the Pleiades, an open cluster of many hundreds of stars situated about 440 light years away. Though with the naked eye, it may look like a small faint cloud. If you let your eyes adjust, you may be able to pick out 5, 6, or 7 individual stars. Through binoculars or a long camera lens, you can see so many. Galileo pointed his telescope at them 400 years ago, discovering they were dozens of suns. But today, astronomers use open clusters to learn how stars age and grow. Keep an eye on the Pleiades, because next week we'll start there and hop to more stars, so keep looking up.
We're at Vandenberg Air Force Base. We're about 20 minutes before the launch of ICESat-2. You might see the white light off in the distance. That's the Delta II rocket.
It kind of feels like an idea that was always going to just stay an idea. But no, it's real. It's sitting on top of the rocket.
You know, and for me, it's kind of surreal. Like you say, it's been 10 years, and it's hard to believe. It's like, we're really here? This is really about to happen? It's totally cool.
This is Dr. Tom Newman. Over the years, his work has taken him to some pretty remote areas to study changes in the ice regions of our planet. And his research, among many others, has defined the goals of the new NASA satellite, the Ice, Cloud, and Land Elevation Satellite 2, or ICESat-2.
And we have ignition. And
the story of ICESat-2 really begins with ICESat-1. ICESat told us all kinds of cool things about the ice sheet and about sea ice that we didn't really know to ask. That data allowed us to measure elevation change of ice sheets in a way that we hadn't been able to before, and showed that all the action on the ice sheets, the places that were really changing quickly, were around the edges. So when we were thinking about what could we do better next time, we knew that was one key component.
In addition to the edges of the ice sheets, ICESat-2 needed to measure a dimension of sea ice that remained elusive: its thickness. To figure out how thick sea ice is, you can measure the height of ice sticking out of the ocean, or freeboard, and compare it to the height of water between the sea ice flows, called leads.
The problem is, sea ice is really dynamic, and those cracks open and close various places in the ice pack throughout the day, throughout the year, and what we need to do is have measurements of the ocean whenever it's available, wherever it occurs in the sea ice pack.
To solve that problem, ICESat-2 was designed with a fast pulsing laser instrument to take precise, near-continuous measurements across its 3 pairs of beams. For 10 years, everything about the mission was designed to measure rapid changes in the most rapidly changing part of the cryosphere. But it has to get into space first.
But it's a huge transition going from the ground to in space. We've spent better part of 10 years, thousands of people have been involved, and actually seeing the rocket there on the pad with all of that work kind of all put together in one place, it's pretty amazing. And then getting up in the middle of the night to go watch the actual launch, it's sort of surreal in a way, because you've put so much time into it for so long, and actually seeing it over there is like, whoa, you know, it's a big deal.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Lift off. Lift one.
That was awesome. Totally cool. There it went. That was Atlas. Last Delta 2, heading on up. So Atlas has been turned on over the course of the first few weeks of the mission, really culminating for us with the laser. So this is our first look at sea ice data from ICESat-2, and it looks fantastic. The signal levels look great. We've got plenty of photons there. We're capturing ridges. We can clearly see the ocean. All sorts of cool stuff in there, and this is just our first data. It's only going to get better from here on out.
The data from ICESat-2 is well on its way into digging deeper into the unknown dimensions of sea ice sheets, and glaciers. It will shed light on changes in sea level and global weather patterns, and once again find new things about ice we didn't know to ask.
So my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
Slight chance the flight may see ICESat-2 in their center windscreen. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast for the southeast coast. Small craft advisories for the south coast. Southeast winds 25 knots. And for the north coast, east-southeast winds 25 knots. Seas running 9 to 12 feet. Lynn Canal, northern inside waters, northwest winds 20 knots. North 20 knot winds for Stevens Passage on Friday. East at 20 for Clarence Strait. And moving on, first day of the weekend. Stronger winds out along the coast, lighter over the inside waters. For the south coast, gale warnings, southeast winds 30 to 35 knots, seas 14 to 16 feet. For the north coast, gale warnings also, east winds 35 knots, seas 18 to 19 feet. Central northern inside waters, variable to north winds at 10 knots with 2-foot seas, and Clarence Strait, southeast winds at 15 knots, seas 3 feet. And for the Prince William Sound area, northeast winds 15 knots for the day Friday. East 25 knot winds for the eastern North Gulf Coast, northeast at 30 on the western North Gulf Coast. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands, east winds 35 knots. Kamishak Bay, winds will be out of the northeast at 25. And Cook Inlet, looking at a north to northeast wind at about 20 knots with seas running 4 to 6 feet. For Saturday, gale warnings for Kamishak Bay, northeast winds 35 knots. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands, northeast winds 40 knots. Gale warnings also for the North Gulf Coast, east winds 35 to 40 knots. And for Prince William Sound, small craft advisories, northeast winds 25 knots. And Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 20 to 30 knots with 5 to 10 foot seas. Kodiak Island on Friday, northeast winds 30 knots, seas around 10 feet. And for the Alaska Peninsula, northeast winds 15 to 25 knots, strongest on the Pacific side of the peninsula. Bristol Bay, east winds 20 knots, seas 3 feet. And for Saturday, Kodiak Island, north to northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. Alaska Peninsula, lighter winds out of the east 15 to 20 knots. And Bristol Bay, looking at northeast winds at 20 knots, seas at around 3 feet. For Unalaska Island, variable to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots. Unimak Island, east-southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And from Atka westward to Amchitka, east winds 30 knots. Kiska to Shimia, northeast winds at 40 knots. And for Saturday, Shimieta-Kiska, gale warnings continue. North winds 40 knots and 30-knot winds from Chitka Island. Central Aleutians, northeast winds 20 to 30 knots. Eastern Aleutians, east winds 20 to 25 knots. For the Yukon Delta coast, St. Matthew Island, the Pribilofs, all looking at a variable wind condition tomorrow. On the light side, about 10 knots or so. South winds 10 knots, St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, and east 20 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Then on Saturday, gale warnings for St. Matthew Island, northeast winds 35 knots, east at 15 for the Pribilofs. Southwest coast, northeast winds 20 knots, 5-foot seas, north at 20 for St. Lawrence Island. Up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for Friday, west to southwest winds at about 15 to 20 knots. Central coast looking at southwest winds at about 30 knots. And for the western Arctic coast, southwest winds 35 knots. And for the Chukchi Sea, west-southwest winds 20 to 30 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. And for the day Saturday, west winds 25 knots all along the Arctic coast, with seas running 7 to 8 feet in the ice-free areas. Otherwise, the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, brisk wind advisories for west winds at 25 knots. And north winds 15 knots from Cape Thompson to Wales. And for tonight, front kind of redevelops back to the west there and keeps areas of light snow going over the northwest part of the state south of the Brooks Range. Most of the moisture will stay off the Arctic coast there. High pressure holds over northwest Canada and western Canada, actually, and ridges into the eastern interior, keeping it dry and mostly clear. And for the Panhandle, no change from what you had today. Rain and snow showers for Kodiak Island, scattered showers for Bristol Bay, and rain and wind increase over the the western Aleutians. And for Friday, stays dry for the most part. For the Panhandle, increasing clouds with a chance of rain for Prince of Wales Island late in the day, and a chance of moisture works up to the southern Kenai Peninsula, maybe into western Prince William Sound. Periods of rain return to Kodiak Island, but should be light along with the light winds. And northwest part of the state could see some areas of snow showers. And for Saturday,
these forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.